This bill, Build Back Better, will be gasoline on the inflation problem. It destroys the ability to extract fossil fuels. Gas prices went up 58%. And here's my message to the Democratic Party. Quit lying about this bill. They should revote it in the House. And Senator Manchin, you were right. I hope you'll stand up and stop this madness. We need to stop Build Back Better before it destroys this country.
On Friday, the CBO estimated the true cost of President Biden's social spending bill is not $1.75 trillion as advertised, but a staggering $4.9 trillion.
Republicans are circulating a modified version of the CBO score for Build Back Better. In their version, it included extensions of programs without being paid for, which we understand is not how the president put forward this legislation. But the reason that they're saying they did that is because Lindsey Graham says if you believe these programs are going to go away after 1 or 2 years, you shouldn't have a driver's license. We all know child tax credits are not going to go away after a year. What does the White House say to that?
Well, to quote of all people Norm Ornstein at the American Enterprise Institute, who put this quite well, quote, "You can't assume programs will be extended just because Lindsey Graham wants to assure that. An estimate based on what's not in the bill is bogus and fundamentally dishonest." I mean, this is not a CBO score. This is a fake CBO score.
Well, all that I know is that the intensity of the weather across the board has some impact as a consequence of the warming of the planet and the climate change. The specific impact on these specific storms, I can't say at this point. I'm going to be asking the EPA and others to take a look at that. But the fact is that we all know everything is more intense when the climate is warming. Everything. And obviously it has some impact here, but I can't give you a quantitative read on that. Look, I know you're all pros. Asking the questions. Imagine if your home's in the path. What do you go home to? What do you worry about? I mean, everything's gone from that baptismal photograph to the wedding picture to the picture of your oldest daughter in a ballet. I mean, it's profound in the states as well as nationally. Because look, as usual, you ask always the best question, and you asked me about whether or not we were going to be able to what we're going to do about it, how we're going to handle this. And part of it is acknowledging that the likelihood of fewer weather catastrophes, absent a continued movement on dealing with global warming, is just not going to happen. Not going to happen.
Well, it's not going to increase inflation. It'll diminish inflation. It has a negative impact on inflation. It doesn't raise inflation. But that's hard for people to think about right now because inflation is up and there's a direct correlation in most people's mind. Well, why is inflation? Well, government's spending money. Well, that's not the reason for the inflation. The reason for the inflation is that we have a supply chain problem that is really severe and is causing a significant increase in prices. The downside is prices have gone up because of supply chain concerns. We've worked as hard on the supply chain concerns. I think you're going to see, you've already begun to see, and you're going to see over the next couple months, oil prices, prices of gas pump come down. You know, the biggest, a third of the increase in inflation is used automobiles. So, I mean, it is a real problem. But the point is that has to do with supply chain as well. But it also has to do with the fact that not everybody's looking for a used automobile. But those who are, they're paying higher prices because there's fewer of them because of COVID and what was sold out and the like. So I think it really is. It's a real bump in the road. It does affect families. When you walk in the grocery store and you're paying more for whatever you're purchasing, it matters. It matters to people. When you're paying more for gas.
Moments ago, you were pretty definitive when you said that President Biden would only support extending these programs if they were paid for, period. Does that necessarily mean that sometime in the future, President Biden would be prepared to raise taxes?
Well, I think President Biden's been pretty clear about his protection of keeping taxes low for the middle class and lowering them.
Repeating, because now we have the numbers Fed Chair Jerome Powell said that transitory is no longer the right way to describe inflation. He said it now appears that factors pushing inflation upward will linger well into next year. I asked Brian Deese this question yesterday, so let me put it to you today. Given what Jerome Powell is now saying, does the administration, does the president acknowledge that inflation is more entrenched and not transitory?
Well, Kristen, I would say that I can't speak obviously for Jerome Powell, but I think part of the point here is that it doesn't really matter what you call it. Our view, but more importantly, the view of the Federal Reserve, which he oversees, private sector forecasters in the markets, has been and remains, and has been for months, that inflation will ease over time. That is the projections of the Federal Reserve. That is the projections of outside forecasters. And that it will ease next.
I think when people hear the term well into next year, though, I interviewed a business owner today, some families who say it's this piling up of prices that's causing the suffering. What do you say to those families who are suffering and they hear a term like well into next year and they feel panicked?
I would say that we take the rise in prices and that impacts individual families, small businesses, anyone across this country incredibly seriously. While we've seen costs increase in some areas and we've seen them move in a good direction in some areas as well. What we need to do now is think about what we're going to do about rising costs. What is our plan to address rising costs? You saw every single Republican in the House vote against Build Back Better. What were they voting against? Yes, they were voting against the president's agenda. They were also voting against lowering costs.
And so yesterday, Brian talked to us for 40 minutes about lots of data points that are moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, given all of those things and given what you're talking about, prices month to month moving in the right direction, what's the White House's big picture view on why so many Americans are so pessimistic about the economy and about the direction of the country? Because another data point is more and more Americans are saying wrong track on monthly polling on that key question.
Well, there are certainly Americans who look at data. I'm not suggesting that. Many of them work in New York and other places. I'm conveying that the way people experience it, I think you know what I'm saying, but the way people experience it, and the president just said this as well, is not by looking at charts in the paper. Go ahead.
On that same point, though, just politically, do these numbers make it more challenging, you think, to pass Build Back Better, given the fact that opponents and even Manchin argue that pouring more money into the economy will only make things worse?
Politically, arguing we're going to bring down the cost of childcare, we're going to bring down the cost of preschool, we're going to make affordable housing a reality. And on the other side of the aisle, you have people who are opposed to lowering that cost is a pretty viable argument. Invaded them is you should look closely at who has a plan here and who's just shouting from a megaphone about it being a problem. We all agree it's a problem. It's who's going to do something about it.
What grade does the president give himself as handling the economy?
I think every president I've ever worked for, I've only worked for two, but they try not to grade themselves. But I will tell you, what the president is proud of working on with Congress, with governors, with leaders across the country, is his effort to lower prices for people across the country.